Hey everybody, this is TJR, and it's time for your questions, my answers. And yes, this is a new thing. I've never done this before, but I'm hoping that I might do this more often. I do, of course, get a lot of questions on the channel. I, generally speaking, try to answer them right there on the YouTube page for the video. But every once in a while, I do get these questions where I feel the question deserves a larger audience, or I feel that the answer deserves a larger audience. Now, this question is one that was posted by Soulmate7, and this was in response to a video that I did a few weeks ago where I analyzed and discussed the two new advanced singles that Paul McCartney had released in advance of his upcoming new album to be entitled Egypt Station. Now, in that video, I referenced a TV interview that I had watched with Elvis Costello. Now, Elvis Costello has done work with Paul McCartney. The two have written songs together. And in that interview, he stated that there was a period of time where Paul McCartney made this conscious decision to change his songwriting style, to literally reteach himself how to write songs, and to stop writing songs in a Beatle-esque fashion in the way that he had done on his earlier albums, like, say, Venus and Mars and Band on the Run. I remember in the interview that Elvis Costello said this was very difficult for McCartney to do, and it was quite a challenge for him. But he was determined to stop writing in the way that he used to write because he didn't want to just keep repeating himself over and over again. And he didn't want to just sound like the Beatles in his solo work. And in that video I said, good or bad, no matter how you feel about Paul McCartney's newer material versus his older material, I felt that you have to give him credit for wanting to challenge himself in this way. Now, this leads to the comment and question posed by Soulmate7 in response to that video, where he stated and asks, and since making this alleged decision to relearn how to write songs and stop writing Beatlesque music, how many truly great songs that people will be singing forever has Paul written? How many hugely popular songs has he written which have topped the charts and sold millions? This is an extremely unfair question, number one. Number two, this question is what I have oftentimes referred to as a kind of double negative question. Because if you try to answer it directly, and if you look at the progression of Paul McCartney's songwriting, there is definitely this period as we come out of the 70s and into the early 80s where his songwriting style does indeed begin to change. And the further we go into his career as the decades progress, we find that he gets less and less radio airplay as just a general rule of thumb. And so if we try to answer this question directly and say, well, we'd have to say, well, not a whole lot of songs, or hardly any at all, or maybe even none at all. Now, I'm not going to go back and look through, Billboard record charts and, try to prove otherwise, but just from my own memory, not a lot. Paul McCartney didn't get the kind of hits that he got back in the 70s when he was having hit singles like Band on the Run, Venus and Mars Rock Show, My Love, Live and Let Die, songs that hit the charts and hit big time. So if you try to answer this question directly, you're basically going to say, well, no, he really hasn't. And this question implies that because McCartney has not had any chart-topping hits since making this change in his songwriting style, that therefore those songs must not be very good, or he would have gotten on the radio, right? Wrong. Because what this question fails to take into account is that Paul McCartney's songwriting isn't the only thing that has changed over the decades. Radio has changed. Today's modern radio, and I'm referring to music radio only, is geared towards hip-hop, modern country, and modern pop. And I stress modern pop, not what was considered pop music back in the 60s and 70s when the Beatles and McCartney as a solo artist were in their heyday. While I am aware of the fact that there is some small independent radio out there, and there is, of course, college radio, this is not the driving commercial force of radio here in the United States. And here in the United States, most of the radio stations that we hear are owned by 3 or 4 major companies. The majority of today's modern music radio is not necessarily so much concerned with quality, although I'm sure quality does play into it somewhat. But what is a bigger concern is that the music fits a certain demographic that station is trying to appeal to. And this is going to be, of course, a younger demographic. And Paul McCartney is not young anymore. Paul McCartney could write Hey Jude today and release it, and he would not be able to get on the radio. Even today's classic rock music radio stations wouldn't play his new music. Well, maybe they might if he shows up for an interview, then they might play, a new song by him. And Paul McCartney isn't the only one. Pretty much all of the great classic rock artists that we admire today can't get on the radio in today's modern music world, and they can't get on the radio on the classic rock radio stations either. A lot of today's legendary artists and bands are producing some of the best albums of their careers, but they cannot get that on the radio. And that's why this question is completely unfair. This question implies that because they're not on the radio, it's not good. But the fact of the matter is, it doesn't matter how good it is, it's not getting on the radio. And let's remember something else. The popular music radio of the 60s and the 70s was exactly that. It was the popular music of the time. These songs that we now revere as classics had their moment on the charts. They had their moment in the sun, and then they were replaced by the next new thing. No one could have anticipated the rise of classic rock radio. Nostalgia for these songs unwittingly gave these songs a second life on classic rock radio, which further reinforced these songs into our consciousness to this day. But if you can't get radio in the first place, that's never going to happen. So even if Paul McCartney writes the best song of his career in 2018, it's never going to have the same chance that a song he wrote back in the 70s did to become a future classic. Because back then, radio was hot to play his latest single. And now, in 2018, radio could care less. I want to share a little bit of personal experience now. Back when I heard that interview with Elvis Costello, which was a TV interview, by the way, I remember I was one of those people who just wasn't really connecting with Paul McCartney's newer music and hadn't been connecting with it for quite some time. And that got me to thinking that, maybe I didn't give this a fair shake. So when Memory Almost Full was released, which was the most current album at the time, I definitely gave it a chance. I definitely gave it more than one listen, and it's become a real favorite of mine, and I think it's as strong as his 70s work. And that, of course, opened the door for me to want to check out New, which was his most recent studio album, and I thought that was equally as good of an album as his best work. And this has made me think that, maybe I need to go back and listen to some of those albums that I didn't connect with previously. Maybe I will connect with them now. Maybe I'll have more of an open mind to it. Then again, maybe I won't. There was this period of time where Elton John lost his way for a number of decades until 2000, when he released songs from the West Coast, and everybody said, Elton John is back. The Elton John of the 70s is back. And maybe McCartney went through that phase. Who knows? Maybe that's what I'll discover. But I've been thinking that I should go back and maybe listen to albums like, say, Pipes of Peace, which I've never fully listened to, and give that material another chance. Really great artists tend to always challenge not only themselves, but their audience. Sometimes they lose some of that audience in the process. Sometimes they don't. And once again, I just want to say, you don't have to like everything. And if you don't like McCartney's newer stuff, that's no problem. But just make sure you've at least given it a chance. And I would say this holds true with any artist. This is TJR. What do you think? Do you agree with me? Do you think I'm full of it? Is radio airplay the only real barometer by which we judge how good somebody is? And Soulmate 7, I do want to thank you for your question, because your question brings up some points that I definitely felt needed to be elaborated on in more detail. I'm looking forward to checking out your comments. Please keep those questions coming, and who knows, maybe that question will be on the next segment of Your Questions, My Answers. Thanks everybody for watching. Take care. Bye-bye.